Welcome back to Write That Down. Today, we are talking about why student housing isn't as protected as you'd think, off campus and off the radar.
In the spirit of what we mentioned last week and being direct, taking a page out of my book, we're going to lead with talkless, which is getting down to brass tacks.
We are shifting a bit because there's a version of the roommate cohabitation, living together, living with people, conversation happening on college campuses that people are not fully paying attention to.
And it's not dorms.
It's kind of everything outside of them.
Right. Off-campus housing, university-recommended apartments, places that feel like an extension of campus.
These places are supposed to, mostly fall under the same legal protections that you would have on campus or with the school. But for far too long, students in these housing situations have not had the same enforcement of those legal protections.
So once you leave the dorm system, you don't leave the risk, but you lose the structure and feeling safe and knowing how to go about reporting and enforcing.
Right. And I think a lot of that stems from what students think that they're going to be getting when they move off campus. Yes, they're going to get the freedom of not having to abide by all the dorm rules.
Right. No RA telling you can't drink in your dorm if you're under 21. Obvious thing.
At Fordham, we had to sign guests in after a certain time of day. I think it was like 6 o'clock at night. If they weren't signed out by 11 p.m., our parents got a notice home about who was in our dorm.
I didn't live in a dorm at Ohio State.
Sorry.
So,
this section's perfect for you.
Exactly. So if a university recommends a building, people assume it's vetted and it's passed some kind of litmus test, right? I think that's a safe assumption.
They assume that it's operating under similar standards to what they were in with the dorms.
Or that there's some kind of oversight.
Accountability.
But that is not what's always happening.
Not even close. I mean, they operate as almost completely separate entities most of the time.
Yeah, university affiliated does not always mean university protected. Should it? Yes. But is that what's happening in terms of reinforcing legal protections that should be enforced? No.
And I mean, there's definitely, from my experience at Fordham, there was some off-campus housing that wasn't just university affiliated, it was university owned. So it had a gate, it had Fordham security was there, and it very much operated under the same structure of rules as the dorms. They were by far, in my opinion, considered the best places to live. I did not live there. I went on study abroad my junior year, and I did not select where I lived senior year.
Amazing.
Yes. It was a great experience. So in dorms, as anyone who's lived in a dorm or had friends in dorm knows, there's a framework. There's codes of conduct. There's enforcement. You have RAs on every floor. And there's a way to escalate issues.
Sure. Like you said, there's protocol. And off campus?
Off campus, you're dealing with private leases, private landlords, and kind of whatever rules exist, if any at all. I certainly don't remember anything about quiet hours or guest policies in my lease. It was very much like a one-pager of this is what I'm to be owed. This is what I'm to be paid every month. This is what happens if you don't pay. And I don't believe there were any obligations under that lease for me or the landlord.
So the expectation carries over, but the protection doesn't. The environment changes, but the assumptions don't.
Right. You're still in school. You are maybe not even a block away from campus. So you would readily assume that kind of what flew on campus is going to fly here with a little bit more leeway. Like I don't have to sign my friends and I can just bring them over. However, your environment just completely changed and you're not operating under dorm rules anymore. Now you're in the wild, wild west of college living.
We are not in Kansas anymore.
Not at all. And that's where it actually matters because people don't necessarily assume protections don't apply the same way once you're off campus. They would assume if there's a problem, there's someone they can go talk to, or they can go, if they're living in university recommended houses, they can go over to student life. Let me tell you, student life is bogged down enough. And I think that's something that you and I really paid attention to and started noticing when we were building Closet, especially in the last 2 or 3 years on college campuses. I live in New York, so I would walk by Columbia and NYU and I would see the protests. And I'll never forget going to dinner by NYU one night and the riot police were out because it was a massive protest and you were just hearing people scream from the river to the sea. And the riot police were trying to guide pedestrians through it. And I've got to be honest, I'm an adult and I was a little like, I don't want to be here. Why is this happening on a campus? So there is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has specific protections for colleges. Most people are going to talk about Title IX because that has to do with sports and that's on the forefront of everything. But Title VI prohibits discrimination in programs that receive federal funding. Most schools, if no one was paying attention to things in the last 2 or 3 years, even private institutions with massive endowments receive federal funding. So Title VI was adjusted in 2025, so last year, with, I'm going to name the bill. No one needs to remember the actual numbers. You just need to remember the name of it. It's 558 HR 1007, which is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2025.
So this applies strictly to university settings. And this is really where we've codified how to define anti-Semitism in an educational setting as we talk about how universities, colleges, those settings are for learning and growth, diversity, all kinds of really important things that shape what kinds of people we want to be when we head out into the world. I think it's obviously very important that everyone can actually show up and be themselves. That means to live, to study, to work, whatever it is that they're doing, intern while they're in school. Hillary and I were seeing that is not something that was able to be a reality for quite a number of Jewish students since October 7th of 2023. That's just reality. Having that extra piece of Title VI really specify what it means to say or do things that are anti-Semitic is helpful because now there's a way to put pen to paper and say, this thing happened to me in my dorm, or this thing happened to me in my off-campus apartment that was university recommended or owned. And that's a way that students can actually have a little bit of autonomy over their experience and empower themselves to hopefully feel safe, make a change.
I mean, living here, I remember hearing something wild, and I don't know if it was NYU or Columbia, but it was a school in the city. And they actually suggested that Jewish students not go to class remotely. I remember just thinking to myself, how is that helping any situation right now? It's basically giving everyone else sort of leeway to continue on and forcing a group of people saying, well, because you are Jewish, you should not go to class because it is dangerous and we don't want to be liable if something happens to you. And I don't know, I know Alexa and I paid attention to the congressional hearings on this, but I think the adjustment to Title VI also holds the schools accountable because what I heard during those congressional hearings, and you've seen the university president turnover since, there wasn't much in the way of accountability. It was a lot of, I don't know and I don't recall. And I recall I was not actively involved in your campus and I recall what was going on.
And there was a lot of context matters. I need more context. And it's, well, now you know what? There is context. That is what the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act provides.
It shouldn't matter if you're in a dorm or in university recommended housing or university owned housing. Even if it's privately operated, you still deserve that protection.
Right.
And I don't know, it always makes me upset when I think back to everything that was happening here.
Yeah, I remember you would call me.
It was horrifying to witness in person.
You would call me. And I would always tell you that I don't know what I would have done had I been on a college campus in New York in the year 2023, in the year 2024. That's really something that got us thinking. Once again, like when I said, not everyone has a Hillary to call. I went back to the drawing board and said,
this has to be in our agreement.
Yeah, we said if schools won't do the work, if schools won't solve this problem, how do we? Because it's unacceptable. No one should be left vulnerable when they are there to get an education. Everyone deserves that. Whether you are paying out of pocket on scholarships, student loans, whatever it is, if you've been accepted to this school and you are there to study, to better yourself, to learn, then you deserve to be there. And no one should be feeling intimidated or othered into staying home and joining classes via Zoom.
Yeah.
So we went back to our developers who are amazing and
I said, you guys are going to want to check that Excel sheet again because I've been busy in there. And I told them that they should be really proud of the lawyer who's playing with Excel and not just doing it in one cell. Let everybody know I wrap text and everything.
Hillary's gotten so good at Excel as this MVP process was chugging along that she even used Excel for some of her wedding planning with some simple formulas, but she's come a long way. Apparently, lawyers don't love Excel. I didn't know this. I live in Excel. I live and breathe in Excel.
We don't do too much in Excel.
Yeah.
Type into Word docs. So in addition to Title VI, I mentioned before Title IX, most people still associate that with sports, but it covers harassment and discrimination based on sex in all educational programs. So
relevant here too. Encompassing, right?
Yeah, and it's another one of those things that's great on campus. Schools actually do pay a lot of attention to it because people are always talking about Title IX. You'll usually hear that, especially with NIL, because the programs now can literally buy players. So a lot of Title IX concerns are being brought up because if you're spending $45 million on your football team to get the players here, what sports are you cutting? And how are the women's teams being affected by that?
Proportionately or disproportionately.
Right. Once you move off campus, whether that gets applied to gets complicated real fast.
Because the school can argue it's outside of their program, right?
Right. The further you are from them, the easier it is for them to say it's not their responsibility.
So distance isn't just physical, it's legal.
Right. I live on the Upper West Side. So if I go to NYU, I'm in a completely different zip code. So I'm not living in university recommended housing if I'm up here and going to school there. But if you walk by Columbia, you'll see tons of brownstones. And this was a huge problem and still is with Columbia just like taking over housing in Harlem. It's like 116th Street. But they were taking over housing and pushing people out. Well, my friend, if you own that housing, it absolutely is physically and legally your problem because you're across the street. So that definitely factors in. If you're completely separated from your university, you've got to take it up with your landlord. You've got to have a roommate agreement. If you're worried about anything that Title VI, Title IX is concerned with, the onus is on you. And anything the university recommends or owns, they play a part in this and they will try to distance themselves. As a lawyer, I can't blame them. It's a huge liability.
So to be very clear, if the university does not own it, but recommends it through their Office of Student Life, Student Living, whatever it might be, the onus is really on the landlord then to comply, have the same protections for their residents or tenants as the dorms would offer with Title VI and Title IX protections. However, should that not be forced and there are issues, you can and should be reporting this
to the school who recommended you. But that's what we talked about earlier, where schools don't have a reporting process in place to handle that, which I think is why it was so important to us to include it. You can say, we have this in writing and we agreed to it. Landlords are making you agree to it. And I say making, meaning it's part of your lease. That's an option too. That's entirely landlord dependent. And we'll talk about that on another day.
Even with the Fair Housing Act, right? There's a lot that goes into signing a lease, how the landlord already operates, that they won't discriminate on the grounds of you as a tenant outside of a university setting already.
Right.
So that very well could be the answer.
Very well could be. And I think we want to be clear. We're talking specifically about adjustments made to Title VI and how Title IX plays into it. There's been a real reckoning on religious discrimination on campuses, how it's defined, how it's reported, whether existing frameworks actually address it, which I think we both know they don't.
Right. And those protections, whatever faith we're going to talk about, they're only as strong as the environment they operate in or they are enforced. We watched prior to the Title VI amendment of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act that we spoke about, we watched countless school presidents be called to testify in front of Congress. And, the reason that most of them truly came and agreed to testify was because they were more or less, they were called to do so instead of the threat of being subpoenaed. So when that's your alternative, it's not that you're running to make a difference and be collaborative here. So we were watching a lot of these testimonies, and it should not, I think, just to be very clear, while you and I were watching this, and regardless of anyone's politics, faith, or feelings, it's completely unacceptable, dangerous, wrong, all of the things. We don't need more context to know that calling for the genocide of Jewish people or anybody else, any other group, is absolutely a violation of any school's code of conduct. And if it should be, then they need to update their code. Everyone needs to feel safe in an educational setting, and the residential settings that coincide with that journey in someone's life. Your faith doesn't change when you move off campus, but the protections around it might.
Yeah. And I think a lot of this has to do with when the school recommends a book. People just assume that it's aligned with the campus standards because my school, they told me that this was a great place to run from. This is on their list of recommended. If you go on to a Student Life website, and I haven't done it in a while because they got smart, they wised up, and now you have to have like a student ID and login to look at them. But back when we first started this, for some schools, you could look it up and they would tell you university recommended housing. And then at the very bottom, they'd be like university recommended roommate agreement, which for the record just covers the lease, split, and whether or not utilities were included or not. I've never seen a shorter agreement in my life. We're not coming for you hard, universities. We're just saying,
Help you.
Help us help you. And when you recommend a building, people assume it's aligned with your campus standards. But realistically, recommendation, most of the time, just means proximity. It just means this is close by.
Or within their subsidized budget as students.
It's important for everyone listening, and if you know people that are moving into off-campus housing or thinking about it, to understand that a recommendation is not a regulation.
You find someone through a school group or move in with people connected to the university, but there's no shared conduct system governing that relationship.
Right. And you and I talked about this story of a girl, and a lot of the stories, honestly, everyone are going to relate back to New York. That's where I'm from. That's where so many of the protests were happening. At least we're hitting the covers of my newspapers because I'm here. And poor Alexa, I sent her articles and reels constantly.
Alexa has family in New York and loves New York very much, and Hillary very much. So
thank you. There was a girl who had her entire living situation straightened out. She knew at least two of the girls that they were going to be living with. She didn't know the third or fourth girl. And they told her that the third girl was of a different faith. And she did ask, is this going to be a problem? I'm Jewish and I don't want to have any issues. And they said, no, not a problem. No one cares. It wound up being a huge problem to the point where she was forced out of her living situation. That should never happen.
This is my surprised face.
And look, no one's saying that you have to live with someone that you don't want to live with. That is not what we are suggesting or proposing. We are proposing and suggesting that you live in a respectful manner, and that the housing gods need to ensure that that's happening, or at least give you the option to make sure it can happen on your own. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. Actually, I was at a Shabbat dinner in New Jersey, and I met a cousin of one of the October 7th hostages. She was Israeli, and she was in New York for medical school. I don't remember if she was at NYU or Columbia. I think I told you about her. So she was living, I think, in their campus housing. She had been constantly harassed because when people would go and rally to bring awareness to the hostages, bring them home now, she would do that sometimes to bring her cousin home. So people found out that that was her connection. She was just harassed. One time she told me she was chased, and she called the police, and she was told that the police couldn't do anything because they had to wait for the school's PD. And I told her what we were working on, and she said, "Where were you?"
Working on it.
I know.
We worked as fast as my little fingers could fly over a keyboard.
And we could afford invoices from our amazing developers who also worked very quickly. Incredible. But we realized that sometimes something happens, conflict, harassment, something crosses a line, right?
Yeah. And you're trying to figure out who has the authority to address it.
Right. The school, sometimes not.
I think, and this is what everything we've said leading up to this really points out, when the structure is unclear, the response is always going to be inconsistent.
Right. So where does this get fixed?
This is the gap, and we've seen so many gaps, but this is one of the gaps that was most important to us.
Absolutely, because the expectation is there, but the framework isn't. And it's also something that I'll say I am very grateful that you shared that view and that passion.
I mean, I look at it very much, everyone has the same chance and the same right to get the same education at the same school, and no one should feel like they can't go back to their dorm or their off-campus apartment, or they have to stay in their dorm or their off-campus apartment because they're afraid to go to class. No one should feel that way. And I think universities can get bogged down in the minutia and the red tape and the details. So if there is something that we can do where it's something that the students take upon themselves, or the parents, hi parents, guys soon too, take it upon yourselves to educate yourselves and know that this is an option. You don't have to depend on the school to do it. You can do it yourself. That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Absolutely.
It's not that we're sitting here trying to make the solution the most legal thing we can think of. We're just trying to make the solution clear.
Right. So our university housing agreements, these roommate agreements that we've designed, they're really to recreate the structure where it doesn't exist currently. We've got anti-discrimination provisions that are aligned with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, explicit protections around religion, including Judaism, where we cite the anti-Semitism bill. You can choose religious respect as something that is in your agreement. Defined behavioral expectations between roommates that really includes any kind of lifestyle things like, hey, parents, you don't want to co-sign on an apartment if there's illicit drug use.
Right. Creating a system people assume that they already have, because they're leaving an environment that had it, and they're going to one that may not.
Right.
So it's very much, if the system doesn't provide the structure, you have to create it. That's what we felt called to do. Watching university presidents go, I need more context.
I think it's context dependent.
Really? I got the context loud and clear.
I even read between the lines. So why is this becoming more of a conversation now?
If you look at college campuses, a lot of them were built a very long time ago, and they are simply not built to have that many students on campus. A lot, at least when I went to school, you were guaranteed housing as a freshman. A lot of schools now don't guarantee housing. You have more students than ever living off campus, but the expectations, frankly, on all sides have not adjusted. Schools still expect students to behave in a certain way. Students are expecting other students to behave in a certain way. And parents who are spending a lot of money, frankly, are expecting things to be like everything they've ever seen on college campuses. Parents have that expectations as well. And it's just not the case anymore. Right.
No, absolutely. So there's just so much more scrutiny on campus environments overall, right?
Yeah, which has, I'm going to use exposed lightly, has exposed the gap.
Very generous word. I agree. So the more complex the environment, the more important the structure really becomes.
Right. And if you're looking at off-campus housing, there's a few real questions you need to be asking. You need to know who governs the behavior, what happens if there's a conflict, what protections apply, and this is always my thing, what's written, what is written down versus what's assumed.
And if you don't know the answers,
you're wholly relying on assumptions.
If it's not defined, it's not guaranteed.
The takeaway from all of this shouldn't be that off-campus housing is a bad option. It's not. It is sometimes a necessary option. It's a great way to start to get that independence before you leave college and enter the real world. It's just a different option.
And that difference matters.
Yeah, the risk isn't where you live. It's assuming the protections are the same when they might not be.
Right. As always, this is Write That Down. We'll be back next week. Until then, it's not about who you live with, it's how you live together.